All right, so they did something to the website that made all of the pages white on black, which makes copying an interesting choice. So I'll have to figure out how to edit the page. It's an unfortunate choice that somebody made.
I guess it's somehow been set to nighttime mode. Oh.
Yeah, and so I changed my browser theme and then redid it. So basically, I changed my browser theme back, right? But as soon as I click on that, somebody decided this was, beautiful for the I guess Linux Foundation did it. Someone thought that this was more beautiful, but the editor is so poor in the wiki editor is so poor for this thing that you can't just paste the text plain without the visual formatting. It copies everything, effectively copies all the raw information for the display, and that was working fine until it wasn't.
So you get black text on a black background.
That's what I'm getting. Yeah,
I see
so
it
I highlighted the text and made it.
Well, you did comment last week that things were getting worse, so this seems to confirm that trend, right?
That's correct, sir.
So, Joe, I'm seeing it in black on white background, normal.
You are? All right, then for some reason my
Yeah, that it's
browser
only for you. Yeah.
some reason my browser then got reset on the latest IT. Okay, then it's me. Somebody
Yeah.
decided that the dark theme was more beautiful at Dell, and
Yeah.
Yeah.
hey, I thought I reset it because if I go to so I reset it so for this, but as soon as I click there, it pops it back. So I don't know what's going on. All right, I'll fix it.
A different browser, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. Anyway, it's just a formatting thing. I'll fix it. At least we can see. Yeah, of course. Okay, at least we can see it. Yellow on black. All right. That said, are there any agenda topics for today? I did not have any.
So I did get some feedback on the SCTP question.
Okay.
So I think that actually the true answer to the question is that this is for the lifecycle and provisioning working group. But essentially, Julia has some concerns that essentially the SCTP is kind of orthogonal to what we're trying to achieve here, because essentially the IP address of, I am going into unnecessary detail here, the IP address of the BMC would not typically be configured by this, although of course it's up to the implementation. And furthermore, the IP address of the BMC is usually typically in the deployment configured out of band somehow. So in any case, she feels that the SCTP question is, as I said, orthogonal to the question about redfish. But
So sure. So SCTP does not change the redfish. I agree with that statement. The question I thought was that do we need SCTP in addition to redfish? Not as a
I understand that, and that is the question that I asked her. I guess I'm not explaining her answer very well. Her basic answer is no, because it's a separate topic. You would typically not use these things together, is what she feels.
Oh, can't use SCTP. Okay.
Of course you can, but she feels that it's kind of conflating two questions together.
Okay.
I think it would be much better to hand this question over to the lifecycle and provisioning working group and get them to come up with an authoritative answer to it.
Right. Okay. All right. So that leaves us with, so that basically leaves us with, again, recommendation is to leave us with redfish, specify the models to use for redfish, the part of the overall redfish tree that's valuable. And then, what else does that leave us with to define? I mean, the basic, I mean, the basic bring up stuff is still possible. And then Kubernetes, specify that there has to be a way to install Kubernetes on every DPU to be OPI compliant.
Well, yeah, I suppose so. On the topic of Kubernetes, I had an interesting conversation with one of my colleagues. He suggested that it will be useful to define the Kubernetes YAML format. Well, to center our definitions around using that YAML format rather than actually requiring Kubernetes itself, because then it's portable. And I think that I remember we had discussion recently about should we also support just native Docker or other mechanisms. I think from the perspective of Red Hat, what's most important is that the container is the unit at which you bring your applications. And so having a standardized format to describe the container to be run would be useful. And it seems to make sense to use the Kubernetes format. I have to confess, I did not ask the architect of our DPU work about this yet, so he may have a violently different idea.
Right. And this would suggest standardize. And again, we covered this in the deck. This would suggest that if we had a common Kubernetes configuration, then everyone would know how to deploy their application across DPUs in the same way.
Right. And I guess the point is, and also anything else that can understand the same spec can also deploy the apps, right? We should kind of separate the specification from the implementation, right?
Sure. No, of course, but again, the point would be that everyone's containerized applications can run on any of the OPI compliant DPUs
Yes.
equivalently. Now, I might need to have my application understand which DPU I'm on to take advantage of the different offload engines on that DPU.
Yes, it may run better on one DPU than another, but it should be able to run.
or it may run better or whatever, right? But the fact is, I could bring it up and run it in the same way.
Yes.
And then again, like most things, it's up to the application to understand what it has to do.
Right, right. So that's, I think, what we've heard from Keysight and F5 is that they would very much like not to have to do all the work to get to that point, right? At the moment, it seems to involve some knowledge of each DPU and some customization. And if we could standardize that, and you can just bring your container and deploy it and run it, I think that that is a good thing.
All right, so I mean, maybe our answer is we scope it down to where we specify the redfish models to be supported and the um, common Kubernetes, so that and we need the redfish to be able to set up the environment. Well, actually, the environment will already come set up for Kubernetes. So we use redfish to configure it. You have Kubernetes to deploy your application, and you're done. And maybe if we could make that work, by just that, we publish that. Mark
And
or Donald? Yeah, Simon, Donald, Mark.
yeah, I would actually, I would be interested to hear what Donald has to say, but that sounds good to me.
Sorry, I'm got interrupted here. I missed the question.
Sorry. The maybe the full scope of the first release of OPI, we scope it all the way down to two things. One, here's the set of redfish models to use. And Mark, we would ask the API group to go say, here's the set of redfish models that you have to expose. And then two, got to be able to do Kubernetes on each of the DPUs with basically zero effort Kubernetes, zero touch Kubernetes. In other words, if I have an IPU, and a DPU sitting there side by side, and I want to deploy an application to them that calculates pi, I containerize it. I can deploy it. All I have to know is how Kubernetes works, and I can deploy it on the DPU. In other words, you make the DPU, all the DPUs plug into the Kubernetes um, management or container deployment system the same way.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely has the advantage that you're standardizing the spec you're going to use for deploying anything. Now, I guess the question is, are there prerequisites? Like, are we assuming that means that you've got basic port level networking on the DPU configured?
So we may have to, okay, it's a good point. There may be some dependent things that we have to say this has to exist from each vendor. And then if we could demonstrate each vendor supplying that environment, I mean, maybe we've been, going all over the place too much, and we should really simplify it for the first release. I mean, this isn't a completely trivial exercise, but you can certainly see the path to get there.
Yeah.
And yeah.
To me, I'm just wondering what a card vendor would have to do to comply with, yeah, Kubernetes can run on my card, and then you can deploy an app using the Kubernetes APIs you've defined or limited. I don't think that's the only thing the card vendor has to do is say, yes, you can put a version of Kubernetes on my card. a compliant version on the card. I don't think that's a problem today, is it?
Well, is it all the same across vendors?
I mean, I see it as a problem. I mean, why not? If I give an API, the card needs to do what the API tells it. How it does it, why do we care?
Right.
So basically, why do I need to have Kubernetes? What if somebody wants to have, I don't know, VxWorks with some monolithic apps there that still, when you give the API, it still configures IPsec or God knows what. And it's their problem how they write that code.
Well, okay, so maybe we specify what we're talking about in a slightly different way, and we say that we want to be able to deploy standard OCI containers with some kind of container orchestration, and
But that makes, I mean,
and we want the specs to be compliant with Kubernetes pod specs.
but
I see. So basically, OPI defines not necessarily the API, but also that we want to have Docker and Kubernetes support.
I mean, we could suggest, hey, we're just going to support Kubernetes. I mean, we could. So one of the values in being opinionated is people know what to do. I mean, part of the problem with DPUs has been they've been so open-ended, no one quite knows what to do with them. If we said, hey, here's a place you can deploy containers, or here's a common way to deploy containers and configure the card through Redfish to put your application that provides some value, Nginx, for example. I mean, it comes back to, how would you make it trivial to put Nginx on any of the DPUs that exist, assuming they supported OPI? What do you have to define to make Nginx as trivial as bringing it up on your Linux system?
Certainly from a transferability workload perspective, it would be ideal if the DPU is compatible from a deployment perspective with your host. So Kubernetes APIs everywhere is one way towards that.
So yeah, so Mircea, we've struggled for 15 months or so on trying to define that set of APIs, and we haven't resolved that. There've been bits and pieces, but it's had spotty acceptance, and so what is that set of APIs? I mean, Mark and Mircea, what would that set of APIs be? Or Mircea, what are you thinking, right? Because again, we've gone around and around this problem a bunch of times, and every time we come to actually do it, it's like, well, yeah, but we need something either much, much more or much, much less is where we end up. And then we go another cycle and we kind of repeat the same conversation. At least that's how I'm viewing what we've been doing. I don't know, Mark, do you have any thoughts on this? Or Mircea, maybe expand?
Which APIs are you referring to, Joe? The networking?
No, just in general, the full set, in the full set of APIs, do we have a set that we could say this is OPI from an API point of view?
Right now we have it for storage. So that one's already defined. Networking went in circles several times, but now we started down the path of defining it from the bottom up, whereas before we were bouncing all over the place trying to make various definitions that were just random, and we got very few, if any, contributions to that. So now we're circling back on that. As far as looking at it from the standpoint of containers, we started looking at it way back, and then it just kind of went absolutely quiet.
Hmm.
And there has been no contribution, no movement on any of the container definitions. So that's where things stand. That's how things have progressed and where they've gone to. And now, essentially, there's very few people joining the work group.
So, so from your point of view, Mark, what mission should we give the work group to improve engagement slash um,
That's an excellent question because a lot of the folks have been pulled or tied up in other things that are more focused, right? So, for example, we've had several members who are off working around AI related things. Maybe that's the area that needs to be focused on because that seems to be where the majority of the members have been shifted to.
that? I mean, that's certainly true across all companies that I
Yep.
know.
Yeah,
Um,
that's what I know from all the companies.
yeah. And
But still, even when you look at AI, you still have to have that foundational set of how do we establish that underlying network connectivity from the port layer to, layer 2 to layer 3.
Yep.
You have to put those pieces into place because that's your foundation for building anything on top of it.
Yeah, so exactly. So what is the minimum set needed so that Kubernetes can happen on top, right? Maybe
Yep.
that's
Yeah.
a good
What's
way.
the minimum set needed for Kubernetes or AI or whatever to sit on top of it? And that's what we don't have defined. And we finally got through a PR yesterday that started to put together the base layer of the port. So we finally got that one through, and it's been out there for almost 2 months. So now that one's been merged in, so now we can work the next level up. We can start looking at layer 2.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying about resources being pulled towards AI. I guess that's happening everywhere, but I think AI to some extent is an example of a type of workload.
Yep.
Yeah.
And we need to build the platform that can support a range of workloads, including AI. So if you need to
Correct.
relate it to strategic objectives, it's not as sexy as working directly on AI, but you have to build the platform or the fun things can't happen.
Exactly. So the first thing we have to do is build the foundation. If we don't build the foundation, we got nothing to build on.
Agree.
so
You there, Joe?
yeah,
Oh,
I was thinking. I was thinking how to break this writer's block, if you will, that we have in OPI. I mean, that's what the exercise with the where we use PowerPoint as a note-taking device. That was the exercise of Red Hat feedback on that. How do we break this log jam to get a minimum release that does something that somebody should care about? Again, so Redfish API for the networking and storage configuration. Is that a way to do it? I mean, again, is that the way to do it? Say, look, here's the set of redfish models. Here's 2 new ones. We could go propose them to redfish. We could also just say, follow the redfish pattern. Say here are, but to your point, Mark, we have to write down what to configure. And how much of a challenge is it to write down what to configure across all DPUs? And then if we had that, we could say, hey, all DPU vendors, can you please provide that support, right? So that basically implement those APIs, so then we could build everything on top of that. So what work does it take us to get to that set of things that we would say, hey, DPU vendors, go implement this, and now we'll have containerized applications that can be deployed in the same manner across all the DPUs and IPUs. What work would you have to do to get there? And again, we could say, look, first release is Kubernetes containerized applications, full stop. I mean, if we try to say, well, let's allow 3 or 4 or 5 things, again, because we're so work resource constrained, probably nothing will happen for 6 months, because we'll make partial progress on all of them and we won't complete any of them.
So, yeah, I mean, it's probably fair to say it's a non-trivial amount of work to get Kubernetes running on a DPU. But I can also say that Red Hat has been working on this, and it was publicly announced earlier this week. So I believe that some of that work can be leveraged in terms of both understanding the problem space, like what questions have to be asked, and also kind of like, I don't want to call it reference implementation, but an implementation of these things.
Simon, can you point us to that? Is it
Yes,
published yet?
I think so.
There's a
I
white,
don't have the link handy, but certainly I can get the material for you.
yeah, there was a white paper press release that came out a few days, Monday, was it? Monday.
Probably was on Monday. Because
Yeah,
that
I mean,
would have
it's
been...
part of Summit. I understand that. So just,
Yep.
I haven't seen the technical, here's how you did it documentation.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what the nature of the materials that have been published and how relevant they are. But let me take action to try to get the relevant materials to this group.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll throw more gas on the fire. Sorry to interrupt again. Kubernetes, in my opinion, it's somewhere up in the sky, but we don't have yet finalized what's here done on the earth. Basically, I need from the DPUs when I use them, even in OPI, the layer 1 to be able to define how DPU interacts with the host, how I create those virtual functions, whatever interface is presented to the host. Not maybe DPU doesn't give anything to the host.
Yep.
All that before we get to Kubernetes, we need to finalize for the version 0.9, if you want, or 1.0 even. We need to finish all the part that gets us to run anything on it. Forget about Kubernetes, anything to run on it. I need to be able to say, I want my ports in fan-out 4x50, PAM4 NRZ, whatever they support, links to come up with FEC and so on. Then I need to put IPs, how many interfaces I put, how I present it to the host or not, like I said. All that needs to be finished and working across all DPUs the same way. PI part. And then it's like, what can you run after that on top to give some functionality on top of that base stuff. Now, do you want to do storage? Now, do you want to do some networking? Do you want FRR? Do you want to IPsec, Nginx, or whatever? And then once you get this, then you're like, hey, how do you meld together Nginx with FRR with blah, blah, blah. So then maybe you need Kubernetes to, keep in check everyone. So that will be like, to me, Kubernetes is like 3.2 release. It's like first, get the card configured, second, gets apps running on the card, and then have something to bring the apps together. I mean, if we do 1.0 Nginx with everything under, I mean, that would be great, but seems like a lot of work.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, so again, the Lifecycle and Provisioning Group has been working on part of that problem. And so I guess we,
I mean, let's release that. I mean, we have smaller releases and we show that we are finishing something. I don't know, every couple of months we put something out.
okay, so we have a couple of DPUs in our lab, and let's skip the hardware installation part. So I have them up and booted. We must, I mean, there must be, scripts or list of commands that we have to run to set them up to do anything. Again, Nginx was brought up on them. Red Hat just announced on that they can run particular set of containerized applications and IPUs. We had, we have a number of examples of making these things go, right? I mean, again, we have sort of closed applications all over the place.
Yep. But they are the steps to do that has been different for every card.
Right.
That's the thing that
right.
is.
So do we have written down anywhere the steps to do that across even two different cards? Captured in our GitHub somewhere. Because we've done it. So do we have that written down? Because that tells us what the common thing is, right? You look at two lists, you go, oh, that needs to be made common. I mean, again, if we take Murcia's point and drive it home, we actually have all the information we need to define what he just said. It just has to be written down, in one place, and somebody has to go through and say, here's the operation, here's the two ways to do it, here's what needs to be the common way. Rinse and repeat for everything you have to do. And then I mean, or am I being like way too oversimplified? Am I way too oversimplifying it, being way too naive about this?
So documenting it, we can document some. But let me give an example. When I configure the ports on, I'll give name, Mount Evans or Dayton Peak, I need to go to the IMC and give some command line commands. And that will set link speeds and so on. When I do, for example, the Marvel car CN106, I think while it's booting, it will prompt me at a point to press capital B or something to get into a configuration menu. And then I need to do like a press 1, press 7, press 9, press 3 to enable what I want. And then I let the car boot and it comes up with those ports. For NVIDIA, I think you have to write some config to the firmware and then you have to reboot the card. It's different. I mean, we can document this, but it's kind of everybody with his own at this moment.
Yeah. it's the process, it's even how you configure the method you use to configure each of these cards is different. To get them, like Merch is saying, to get the port speed set, and then, you know, are you passing traffic through the PCIe bus to the host or not? That's a whole nother set of configurations on each of these cards. Some of them require drivers to be installed on the host first, that then you're configuring portions on the host and on the card to make that happen. So yeah, it's not an, I don't think it would be an easy, it would be easy for us to define, okay, here's what we want to have happen, and here's an API that you can, that we say, I want 4x25 ports, and I want them connected in such a way that the traffic comes into the DPU compute complex and is passed to the host. And so we've got an API that says that.
So, Paul, question, Paul. So each of for now, let's say that, you know, each of them would have a different way of bringing up, right? And then I would see it as a script than an API, let's say, right? And then some of these tools, I wouldn't go to the fleet management tools, but there are all these, you know, config tools that usually, you know, type these commands for us, you know, for a better way of saying it. The bigger question, right, or maybe the next question is, how much of it is open? We all have signed NDAs, and this is
that's
confidential. So that's the very, very basic step to bring it up. Just to answer, you know, Joe's point, right? That's like step, I don't know. We keep going from step 1 to 0 to -1. So maybe it's step -1 now. But I think, that's the bring up part. And then what comes later in terms of basic objects, right? I just need one physical interface, right? We need, if you remember when we discussed the layers, you know, if you don't get a network interface and, you know, whatever is the basic storage object, then all these higher layers comes later. So, but even before we go to those layers, bringing these cards up in a uniform way, they will have their own way, is something I think for some time is fine, I think. I think resolving
I think you're right.
Confidentiality aspect
NDA problem is the first thing, because Joe, you said, can we document how to bring these up? I can document one of the cards because all of their information is publicly available on the web. The other two cards that we've been using, I can't document them because I have NDAs that say this documentation is proprietary.
But I mean,
so does Mercha, so does everyone else. So
beyond the physical part of the bring up, the commands you type are considered NDA proprietary?
They're not published anywhere except in this NDA documentation I have access to.
Okay. Which ones are those?
So the Intel card has some 7,000 pages of documentation on how to use these cards, but it's NDA. And I've asked, hey, can I get a simplified list that we can publish? And Intel is still working with their attorneys to figure out if they can do that.
Okay. So
NVIDIA's everything is just, you go to Google and type in what you want to find, and it's there. Their entire getting started guide is available.
And Marvell.
And Marvell is, everything has been hand delivered to me, so I haven't found it.
Marvell is NDA. I would suppose it's NDA.
Yeah, a lot of it's license agreements, Joe, with the SDKs.
Yeah, can OPI actually then facilitate making that public?
Well, I mean, if we can't, then we should then then we have to shut OPI down because there's nothing for us to do.
Mm.
Other than, okay, I'll take that back. We could define redfish models and be done with it. So if you can't, I mean, if the commands to bring the card up and like configure interfaces or NDA SDK information, then there's no OPI at that level. So we have to assume that all of that's been run and the card is in a state, all the cards are in an equivalent state for supporting redfish, and then the agreement will have, I mean, again, what we'll have to do is say, here's the redfish API, go get compliant to it. And then what we'll have to assume is that the redfish API would be enough to set up the Kubernetes environment. So then you'd have equivalent Kubernetes, and then we declare victory and we're done. And you couple that to, here's the behavior of the system in the host, the other part of the lifecycle and provisioning working group, and then you're done. And we can declare victory with OPI.
I think something like that is a good way to go initially. You can always iterate over it and peel the onion back and make some of those black boxes a bit more open by defining them as well, but that doesn't have to be done up front as part of the first milestone.
Now, so what it'll suggest though is we're not going to solve Murchia's pain point, quote, customer pain point of, I have to do all this special stuff and it's, a non-trivial amount of configuration completely independent of anything in common to get to a point where I can do a few things in common. That's what it suggests.
Yeah,
right. But maybe then that suggests that the milestone number 2 addresses some of those pain points.
Yeah, there are things that the cards have to do, and there are things that needs to be done elsewhere. I think the higher layer models, once they are set up, so maybe that's the area. And then I think this is a basic question for the board, right? We need to go back and say, hey, if we can't get these boards up and if we can't get the resource commitment from each of the groups, we need to kind of look at the goal. That's a parallel. I'm not sure if it is a parallel discussion. Maybe it's maybe the first discussion to have there. And then I do believe even if things are all in NDA documents, there are layers above where there can be a industry-wide co-design or collaboration where we could make things simpler. Yeah,
people could open stuff up, but nobody seems to want to. Let's have that discussion in the board meeting.
Yeah, and I'm also thinking, right, even if it is closed, there are ways, right? I mean, because I've seen other groups, right? Maybe ION is like that, I think. So if anyone who wants to use these DPUs have to, sign these NDAs and take these cards from these vendors. But let's say that part is, is documented, but is available through NDA, through the various companies. So higher layers in terms of how do we bring up basic, network interface and, storage interface, and then create from physical interfaces a layer of virtual interfaces, and then get some very basic basic networking enabled so that, a Kubernetes will look at it as a generic compute, right? I mean, to get to that, those layers are open. So I somehow believe that even if the lowest layer of bringing up is confidential and has something, but the higher layers can still be, something that we can collaborate if we agree on basic models. But for that for us to be motivated for that, I think we need to resolve something at the board.
And this is why when we started looking at the API, we had to put in this shim layer because the shim layer had to do the translation for each board. And the reasoning behind that is because each board had a proprietary NDA or license agreement type of thing that we had to deal with. So that was up to the vendor to define what that translation would be from an API that would be generic to whatever the board itself needed specifically.
Yep.
Yeah, all good points.
And again, just to kind of get my thought out there. So so somewhere I'm seeing that APIs start at a certain point. Before that could be some other simple scripting and other tools. So maybe that's also, you can call that also an API, but because bring up is complicated and such a manual process at this point, I'm unable to see it as API. I don't want to get into all the semantics, but so the API working group could be starting. It needs some base, right? If the cards have to come up, it has to be certain level, and then suddenly the work of that group starts, is how I'm seeing it.
So I guess Mark and Murcia, could we say what that base is where the card is up to a certain or let me rephrase it. What do you get when you get all the cards up to an equivalent point? Do you now get a set of open APIs you can use that we could build on top of that? Or is it still NDA and we'd have to do a sort of a pointless bridge layer that no one will support? Because again, we tried the bridge layer and people and the DPU vendors, none of them, to be fair, wanted to take on the maintenance of that. And so we sort of dropped that. Remember, there were all these vendor bridges.
Yep.
And no one agreed to or took up the maintenance of those, even at that level. Like, yeah, okay, yeah, we'll match those to our, special sauce, and now we'll have a common API on top.
Well, and that is where the problem exists. The problem exists where each card has a specific way to do the configuration to its underlying functionality, right? So you can have a generic API, you can define what that is, and everybody can come to an agreement. The problem is then you have to take that API with those parameters and translate it to what each card needs. And that is where it fell into, well, the vendors needed to provide that. And that was due to, yeah, you have NDAs, you have license agreements.
So for me, a clear example, IPsec demos that I did on Intervals, Bluefield, and Marvel card. I had brings them in a different way, like I said, layer ones, and configure IP interfaces on them as prerequisites. Have connectivity to it, so I can run this OPI script, install Docker if it was necessary, configure all that, brings a strong Swan container up. On some of them, I didn't even, because it was a demo, but in production, you need to enable the offload, because you don't want the ARM cores to do the work. You want to enable the offload, which that's also different. And once you get to this point, that till here has been all custom, Now you can run the same OPI API script for IPsec that will configure, X amount of tunnels, and then you can run your IPsec workload. But before you get to the strong fun container being up and IPsec overload, all that has been manual work and different on all three vendors. One way to circumvent DNDAs will be, let's say, we write whatever we need to write, then I email that file to, let's say, the Marvel or Intel person that is part of this group, and then they make the PR and make it public. Like for Intel, I don't know, Dan Daly, we send him the file and say, you make the PR. I don't know who's the representative for Marvel, and I think NVIDIA, it's Elon, yeah. So he needs to do it. Somebody from that company will have to make it public, and then, it's not me or Paul, whatever, breaking some NDA, and then we end up more trouble than it's worth.
Mircha, the idea is not really to, make some of it public. I think if somebody is choosing to keep it closed, that is, I think that's a business decision. And I think the idea is that if there is a common code that can give a common API, and those, the plugin model or the adaptation layers is what needs to be implemented and made available. So even while things are confidential and still in an area that's still evolving, we should be able to move forward. I think we have to find that model.
Right, so we could define some APIs that allow a use case to work, for example, IPsec under discussion here. But then, of course, you have the implementation of those APIs. And as you say, if someone wants to release them openly, that's great. Personally, I would go for that. If, on the other hand, a business is operating differently and they wish to keep it closed, well, as long as it's implementing the standard, right, then there's a common layer. Now, the user experience might be different. I have opinions about the merits of openness, but it's not necessarily a hard requirement, right?
Yeah, open API, not open implementation. So let's say let's say eventually, right? Let's say there are 4 companies, and each of us have signed NDAs with all the card vendors, and there is this specialized code each of them have, and then I think as long as the common code is agreed upon, and then a bunch of us have access to it, and we are able to do things. So anyone who wants to use it ultimately need to go get the licenses and whatnot. I mean, that's the business models. If we try to go and try to break it, then we're unnecessarily picking up a bigger industry problem. That's not something that's easy to solve.
Right. So if I put my OPI hat on, then I say that's great, and that's very reasonable. If I put my Red Hat hat on, then I would be advocating for them to open things up and so on. But that's a different discussion to the one we're having here.
Yep. Agreed.
Okay. So where did we end up? Does anybody want to take a shot at summarizing where we ended up?
I think there are 2 things that we need to take to board. One is resources, which is a never-ending discussion, and the second one is this confidentiality agreements not able to, we are unable to bring it up in a common way. I think these 2 needs to be taken to the board and discussed so that we understand the perspectives. And if I'm not sure if they will come out with the model. Open API is different from open source for me, and maybe they may come back and say, hey, TSC, why don't you tell us how that can happen? So Val may come back into our code. So we have to do a little bit of homework offline before we go there, but that's one action item for us.
Yeah, and that's probably the existence one. Without answering that problem, everything else we do is on no foundation. All right, so let's leave it there. We're at time. Thank you for the good discussion, everyone. And indeed, I had a free theme change in the OPI project setting, so it was somebody found it for me, and I tried it, and sure enough, I had a
Very
free
good.
theme change.
Awesome. Glad that worked.
Yeah, back to the way it's supposed to be. They were trying to save my eyes, which we're way beyond saving at this point in my lifetime of staring in computer screens. So, all right. Thank you very much, everyone. So for next week, I'm going to try to queue up a lifecycle and provisioning full readout and discussion with Gal. And I'm going to try to get that on the agenda because I think we need to understand at the TSC level exactly where everything is and where it's heading and what the expectations are. And then at the board, VinCat summary is perfect for what we need to do at the board meeting before we go back and say, here's what we're going to commit to in terms of base configuration APIs, Redfish, Kubernetes, sequence. All right. Thank you very much. We'll end the call.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.